external resellers of McKinsey's benchmarking services, that is a proprietary data set, and that furthermore, from a Treasury Board policy on large transformation projects, having that independent benchmark is required. The justification from a PSPC perspective and that of the client was sound. I can pause here.
I'm afraid that's our time. Ms. Atwin, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues and to Ms. Reza and officials for joining us again today. So roughly 70%, which is $3.3 billion of Public Services and Procurement Canada's requested authorities for 2024-25 will be for the core responsibility of property and infrastructure. This core responsibility also accounts for roughly 80%, $3.2 billion of the department's revenues and other reductions. How would the department use these funds to improve access to affordable housing? Emphasis on the affordable.
Thank you very much for the question. I'll start and then I'll turn the floor over to the Chief Financial Officer. The appropriations that you referred to are part of the ongoing government business of running our real property portfolio. PSPC is the largest office holder in the Government of Canada, and we also undertake many large construction projects, as you see here on Parliament Hill, building the Science and Infrastructure subset and Laboratories Canada, and other large construction projects. So that money is mostly apportioned to keeping those large capital projects on track and moving to completion. In terms of affordable housing, Budget 2024 has announced new measures that will provide PSPC with the capacity to actually move into this space, look at some of the lands that we have and actually mobilize and accelerate how to use those lands and repurpose them into affordable housing. Wojo, did you?
So as the Deputy Minister stated, so in prior years, we don't really have funding for affordable housing. It's mostly what has been announced in this year's budget. So it's really very focused on the Lands for Housing initiatives in the budget announcements, and those will be reflected through supplementary estimates, and they're not reflected in our main estimates.
Great, thank you. And do you know if there's consideration for a more ambitious target than the 54% for the indicator of the percentage of Crown-owned buildings that are in fair or better condition?
Thank you very much for the question. This is an excellent question because there is a ladder in terms of the building conditions. So we look to try to say to fair to moderate to make sure that we can modernize the workspace, to make sure that we can look at offsetting our carbon emissions. So there's a whole kind of grade in there of effort and activity. And as you indicated, that is our target, but it may be reviewed during the upcoming year, especially as we move to try to convert some of our office holdings into housing.
Great. And when does the federal government expect to achieve a 100% total accessibility score for Crown-owned buildings in line with the new standard?
We'll have to come back to you in writing with that question. Thank you, or answer.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. And what proportion of the funds requested in these estimates will be allocated to improving the capacity of the Translation Bureau? We've run into a few issues kind of with a lot of our documents for this committee in particular, but I know it's something we're considering as a whole of government. So as there conversations about improving that capacity?
Thank you very much for that question. PSPC is the home of the Translation Bureau of the Government of Canada. And as you know, we have a lot of competing priorities, be it Parliament, be it various departments who use our services. Budget 2024 gave the Bureau some O&M for about $35 million worth of work, which will help with some of the backlogs we're experiencing, will help attract some new talent for translation and for interpreters in various different elements and different formats. It's super important to us. I know that we have been trying to keep up with the timelines for certain documents, and I know that I myself have looked over the last 3 or 4 years to see the level and the volume of translation that we're doing here for the houses as well as for supporting department efforts. So this money will be a welcome reprieve to help us. And I also think that there was an intent to put together some small scholarships to be able to attract translators from across the country. And Dominique, je ne sais pas si vous avez.
Good for now.
Good. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I was actually at a funding announcement this morning with regards to artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. So I'm just curious, what risks, if any, have you identified concerning the Translation Bureau's increased use of artificial intelligence solutions such as the GC Lingua?
Thank you very much. I'll start and then I'll turn to Dominique. We actually find it's a very powerful tool to be able to help the translators reduce what has already been translated by them and focus on kind of some of the new language coming out, some of the more high yield complex where that nuance and that human interaction is important. Dominique?
Yes, no, happy to complement that. So we've seen huge progress with respect to AI over the last few years. So for translation, the DM did mention that it's a tool, and we believe in humans. So people can increase productivity, but they need to be able to leverage those tools. And at the end, there's always basically a professional translator that is that we want to make sure that this person is going to be reviewing the material before it's being sent to the client.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I believe in people as well, but we certainly have the tools that we can harness to help us do our work. But I think that's very close to my time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. Mrs. Reza, I'm going to ask the same question to you that I asked to the Minister last week with regards to lands and buildings. And so my concern was that despite the sale, these buildings might remain federal property. This would mean that it's not necessarily the rules and regulations of the municipality or the province that would be applied. So could you reassure me? So if you're divesting yourselves of a land or a building, it's not the federal laws that will apply, but rather municipal regulations or provincial ones? Thank you for the question. I took a note. I think it was last Wednesday that we were here, and I noted the question, and we're looking at different scenarios. We are implementing a new program for housing. We have to understand different scenarios, and so I've taken note of this, and we'll come back once we have more detail. Thank you. Because with regards to housing, the federal government has no protection for to protect owners or renters. So if the federal government had to be responsible, this might lead to a huge imbroglio in Quebec and probably elsewhere in Canada as well. I'm going to now go ahead with what you were talking about, ethics and compliance of suppliers, that it's important to check this. And we've seen that the issue perhaps is not only on a level of suppliers, but you could have situations where some civil servants might also be involved in ethical issues or issues linked to compliance. How to make sure that civil servants are ethically responsible and compliant with laws, and that it not be suppliers that will be penalized, but rather the person who is not compliant with the regulations? Yes, answer. I think that with the Treasury Board, you spoke about the Public Service School of Canada. I think that it's up to all civil servants to be aware of their responsibilities with regards to values and ethics. We have begun changing our own internal practices to have more training so that employees will be full aware of their responsibilities when it comes to declaring conflicts of interest, for example. Thank you. I'm going to move on with good news that we had in Quebec recently. The repurchase of the Quebec Bridge, and I look and the expenditure budget is not there because this is new. If I look at Supplementary A, I don't see it. We know that the Quebec Bridge is UNESCO recognized and it's in very, very poor shape, and it will take a lot of money in order to update and renovate and restore this bridge. So when are we going to see this money, and how much per year are contracts, or do we already have a call for tenders from the federal government for the Quebec Bridge? Thank you. I'm going to check, but I don't think that we've had a call to tender yet. We have to work with key departments for this. I think that it will be Infrastructure Canada, and we will check for you. And then contracts will be awarded for restoration, whatever is required. We will be there. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Page, Mirabel. Mirabel is important for aeronautics, especially with regard to training and maintenance of aircraft. With the contracts for F-35s, is Mirabel keeping it standing with regards to repairs and maintenance of these aircraft? Thank you very much for the question. So the question comes with the F-35 project. The F-35 project, as you know, is being implemented, and we are expecting to receive the first aircraft in 2026, 2027. As for the economic spin-offs for Canada, this will be over several different steps. We have a step now where we have to find a place for maintenance of motors, for a warehouse for that. So we started a joint program office. We have a memorandum. There is going to be a partnership for this, and different companies throughout Canada will be involved in this process for selection. Yes, but Mirabel already has a lot of expertise in this field. So can I understand that this expertise is more or less recognized and could, in fact, be forgotten? We are full aware of the expertise. We are using this expertise after the selection of the warehouse for the maintenance that I was speaking to. There will be other selections made. Also, one is called platform.
We're out of time, but perhaps on next into French. Mr. Backrack, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses. In my questioning to the officials from the Treasury Board, we were talking about the return to work directive and the process for ensuring that the physical spaces that employees are returning to are appropriate for their jobs. And my question was around what standards PSPC utilizes in that process, because I'm hearing from public sector employees who are concerned that the spaces they're being asked to return to are not always going to be appropriate for the tasks that they're asked to perform. So is there a defined standard for returning to an office environment that PSPC is utilizing?
Thank you very much. And I will start with one quick additional comment. We're doing two things at once. We're looking to reduce the portfolio by 50%. So to, remove land, and that means that we're going to densify a lot of the buildings. In terms of the fit up that you ask about, we do two things. We follow provincial and federal building codes that are set, by various federal, provincial, territorial. The federal ones have an NRC, a National Research Council link. As it relates to the fit up, we also look at the industry standards for office space, and we're consistent. So we are moving to a new standard, and they're formalizing what that will look like. So it will go to be approximately 9 meters squared. Now, I would add that the key addition here is that not all office space is equal. You may need special purpose space, depending on the type of work you're in, depending on the type of, if you're dealing with highly sensitive legal matters, if there's national security. So it is not a standard that will be applied one size fits all, and every deputy head is going to be looking at how best to optimize that space so that employees have a space that's welcoming and accessible.
So for a generic office job, asking an employee to return to that office, they should expect about 9 meters squared per employee for their function?
Roughly, yes.
Okay. And in terms of the rest of the work environment, when it comes to privacy, the noise environment, the sound environment, that kind of thing, are there standards for that as well, or does it vary by workplace?
Again, I think that is going to be consistent with the federal standards that are established through the building codes, the provincial. It's like how many people, I heard you in your earlier comment talking about people who don't have desks. That's obviously not acceptable. And, we will be looking over the course of the remainder of the year to make sure that it's as seamless as possible as we go to unassigned.
There was a mention of a 4-month period that employers were being given to ensure that the new workspaces employees were being asked to return to were appropriate. Is 4 months enough time? It seems like when you're talking about renovations of buildings, that seems like an incredibly short amount of time.
I would agree with that statement. We have to make sure that, this currently is 2 to 3 days for employees. So there is enough space currently for 2 to 3, but in terms of 4 months, it will be ambitious. I've had discussions with TBS in terms of making sure that fall ramp up is, to the best of our ability, understanding that there will be some exceptions. There are some major buildings here in the National Capital Region that are under construction. So automatically we'll have to look at swing space. And the other point I would add, we talk about physical fit up, but that fit up has to be like the room here. There has to be tech in place. There has to be screens in place. So we're working very closely with Shared Services Canada to make sure that it is a holistic office.
I think when we're talking about an office building in downtown Ottawa, people have one sort of, vision of what that looks like in terms of bringing employees back to work. But in the area I represent, we're talking about federal government offices in rural communities in all sorts of different situations, some of them in very old buildings. And the employer is being asked to make these buildings ready to receive employees that have been working remotely. And we're hearing concerns from those employees who are concerned that the space is not going to meet their needs, that it's not going to be appropriate for the tasks they're asked to perform. Are there concerns in smaller communities that when we're dealing with older buildings and smaller buildings, that 4 months is not going to be adequate to meet people's needs?
Similar to the concerns here in the National Capital Region, absolutely. So I think there's 2 tracks, looking at it kind of in the various regions to see how best to optimize it so that the employee has an office to go to, that it's ready, that it's in place. Otherwise, there has to be some understanding of timelines. In terms of the region, another area that I find interesting is, do we centralize so that there's a hub? Do we continue with decentralize in rural areas? It's really looking at the best possible support for the employee and for service delivery.
And we've heard a variety of opinions on the net benefits of this directive. And I haven't seen any sort of empirical evidence of the benefits that we're trying to secure as a government. Can you provide to the committee what empirical analysis has been done around things like productivity and satisfaction, those kinds of things? Because it seems to me if a lot of the workforce is upset about the directive and they're coming back to the workplace and being squeezed into these offices in the next 4 months, that actually we're going to have a less productive workforce in the public service than we did before. How I guess the first question is, what's the empirical evidence? And then the second question is, what's the plan for managing that dynamic?
I'm afraid
I just have a way
option
of
C,
ending
there's no time for an answer.
I'll just let it linger.
Okay, we'll get back to you. Mrs. Block, please, for 5.
Thank you, Chair and Ms. Reza. I am going to circle back to the subject of my questions in my first round of questioning. And I guess what I'm really grappling with is how do we reconcile the fact that PSPC, you yourself as the Deputy Minister, and the Ombudsman appear to completely disagree with what can be termed as robust justification when it comes to contracting. And as I stated earlier, the Ombuds found that the answers to the 7 Treasury Board questions were insufficient. Can you tell us who was the contracting officer that you referenced in the memo to the minister that appeared satisfied with the answers to those 7 Treasury Board questions?
Thank you very much. I think it is important to note that PSPC and the deputy, myself, have accepted all the recommendations of the procurement ombudsman. So I don't want there to be a sense that there's light. So I think that's important because we welcome that kind of sunlight on our practices to make sure we have rigor. We have submitted to the committee the names of all the procurement officers. And I would just turn for a moment to see if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, if I may add also, we've learned a lot from these reports, and I would say that the challenge function that is being played right now by our contracting officer is much greater. The OPU kind of clearly made that very clear that there was this challenge function to play. So, in future sole source, we've learned from the OPO, and we're also kind of learning and tweaking the process accordingly.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. You've accepted the recommendations, and going forward, you're going to look towards implementing them. But I do sense that there's a bit of a disagreement between what the ombudsman found in this particular case, this particular contract, and what you yourself believe to have been robust justification for why McKinsey was the only contractor that would have been able to hold the exclusive rights to this contract. Can you tell me what mechanisms are in place for PSPC to push back on, say, another department's justification if you don't believe that they've provided robust justification? What are the mechanisms in place to push back on them?
Thank you very much for the question. In fact, in the example that you just cited, the procurement officer did push back and actually drill down on those 7 questions and ask for additional information. So that's an example. There's a opportunity to advise their manager and their supervisor that they don't agree with the client. There's an opportunity with some of the new rules that have been put in place by Treasury Board to emphasize the role of the manager in the client department. As I'm sure the committee is seized with, there are roles and responsibilities both for procurement as the client, the contracting authority, and the client. And so understanding better and making sure it's clear of the escalation around it and what is actually a way to document the rigor. I think this is an area that I have learned a lot in the last year and a half around the rigor of the documentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the fact that you are taking this to heart and have been learning much around the rigor that needs to be applied. I do have one last question. Will you provide the committee with a copy of the 7 Treasury Board questions, the answers that were provided to justify this particular contract, and the further justification that was sought by the contracting officer?
Certainly, I thought it had been, but I would be happy to confirm.
Thank you.
Mr. Kuzmarchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much once again for being with us in front of committee. You've always been ready to come here, testify, provide insights, answer questions. I just wanted to say thank you for the tremendous work that you do. I did want to talk a little bit about the Translation Bureau and talk about some of the funding that's been allocated for the Translation Bureau and how are we boosting the work of the Translation Bureau. And specifically, knowing that this month, June, is Deaf-Blind Awareness Month, I wanted to ask what types of additional services are we implementing to ensure access to information to Canadians who are deaf, deaf-blind, and deafened?
Thank you very much for the question. I'll start and then I'll turn to Dominique. One of the things that's key and I think helpful for this committee to be aware of is that every day we see increasing demands for the services of the Translation Bureau. Not only in the written form, but with our interpreters, as well as providing service to all Canadians. So for example, now we're working on making sure that we have our meetings, we have availability for translation in both English and French for the deaf community, and we're looking at more and more access along these lines. So I'm glad you raised it. I would also note that the demand keeps going up for all the services. And while we received 35 million from the budget, we are continuing to look at how best to allocate it. And I think a real example for this committee to consider is that in 2020, so 4 years ago, we spent about $20 million a year in terms of translation costs for the House, for the Senate and the House of Commons. We're going to be at 50 million this year, and we absorb that internally. So it's very important that we're able to provide services to people that need it for the interpretation, for the translation. And on interpretation, I'm going to turn to Dominique, who is now the ADM of procurement, used to be the CEO of the Translation Bureau. So à vous, monsieur.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So a lot of new safety measures have been put in place for interpreters, as you know, for language interpreters in the room. So over the last 3-4 years, new measures have been put in place. We're also, the Translation Bureau is also looking at increasing capacity, taking a lot of steps to increase the capacity for interpretation. And you spoke also about sign language interpreter. This is oftentimes, I would say, hidden jewel that we're not necessarily, hidden gem that we're not necessarily aware that the translation that PSPC does on a day-to-day basis. We provide sign language interpretation for those who are deaf, who cannot necessarily hear, government employees, when we have also conference. So, of course, there's also the need to make sure that, we're able to train a new generation of sign interpreters, and additional funding could be used for that. So, also we've been liaising with the Chief Accessibility Officer of Canada to make sure that the needs are properly understood. So again, I would say a lot of training, and in terms of also recruitment with the university, scholarship also, those are some of the examples that will be done with the new funding.
That's wonderful. I do appreciate the answer. And if you're able to provide the committee, perhaps in a written response, just to paint a picture for us, let's say the last 5 years or the last 3 years, how the demand on for translation services has increased. So that would be in terms of the volume of requests, pages, things like that. That would help our committee and our work as well, too, if you can provide that for us. Just paint a picture of this increase in demand for translation services. Wanted to change gears and talk about greenhouse gas emissions. PSPC reduced greenhouse gas emissions, as I understand it, by 59.9%. It's interesting. Mexico just elected the first woman president, but also elected the first climate scientist, I believe, to the role of president. This is President Claudia Sheinbaum, who actually was a co-author of one of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate reports. I mean, here in Canada, we have a leader of the opposition, conservative opposition, that doesn't even believe in climate change, doesn't believe in action on climate change. And so I just wanted to ask you what PSPC is doing to help us fight climate change, if you can paint a picture for us on that.
Certainly. As you know, PSPC is the real property owner of the Government of Canada. There are other custodian departments, but we are among the largest, and we have a responsibility for greening government operations. So we spoke earlier about return to the office. What does that look like in terms of our carbon reduction, in terms of what we're doing here, for example, in the parliamentary precinct with the energy savings, the ESAP program. So there there is a lot, and PSPC is quarterbacking that and has seen a lot of building reductions, and at the same time looking at new building materials.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have so many questions. We spoke about the modernization initiatives for contracts. We asked how this would be simplified, but my main concern has to do with how to adapt to the realities of small and medium-sized businesses. Sometimes they are few people, a small number of people, but to fill out all this paperwork requires endless hours of work. So how can we simplify and adapt for SMEs and their realities with this initiative? Thank you. This is a question that we ask regularly because we are looking at the regulations, the implications the requirements of the policy, it's hard because it does become a burden. So to find a way to modernize and to not have such a heavy load, I believe you've thought about the e-procurement system, and this will help a lot because it does give the providers the opportunity to fill in data once and then to change once when required. So each time, right now, they have to update everything. So you've already heard about security-related issues, oftentimes, and 99.9% of the time, security is there, but it's perhaps not in the file. So perhaps Dominique has something to add. No, thank you. I have to go to my next question, but thank you. Right now, in Gatineau Hall, we see Secteur du Partage is under renovation. There's a building that seems to be completed. Well, there's windows anyways. And can you tell me, these are not just changing windows, so it's beautiful to have new windows, but what else is being renovated, and how long is it going to take, and what is the cost?
We have about 10 seconds. Perhaps it's something you could provide in writing to us. Because it seems to be a rather large answer.
Parce que ça, c'était où il y avait tellement de défis de construction.
Yes, there were a lot of challenges, but also we're doing things inside. But it's to make sure that outside it is compliant with standards.
Mr. Backrack, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 4.5 or so years ago, one of the first meetings I had with the then Transport Minister, Marc Garneau, was about a federal property on Haida Gwaii, the Sandspit Inn, which is owned by Transport Canada. And the community has been trying to get it back in community hands. It was once operated by the community as a hotel, and when the lease wasn't renewed, that process has been ongoing for over 4 years. So, talking about this desire to reduce the footprint of public sector buildings by 50%, it looks very different in rural communities. And it seems like a 4.5-year process that still hasn't completed to divest the government of this property that could be used for the benefit of the community seems like a long time. And I hear all sorts of stories about studies being done that seem to take forever. And there's lots of poking and prodding going on. But I'm wondering, with this new mandate to create housing, to use federal properties to meet community goals, what is being done to accelerate those processes? Because they seem to go at a snail's pace.
Thank you very much. And I'm so glad you mentioned the Sandspit Inn, because I wrote Sandspit on my notes, and I was looking at it earlier, but I had not put in. So now I have that context. I think there's two things to be aware of. Traditionally, it's taken us approximately 9 years as a government of Canada to dispose of a property. It has to be circulated. People have to put up their hands for an expression of interest. In the new model, what we're going to try to do is avoid the disposal process and actually look at, using surplus lands to build affordable housing and have a program around that, our housing program. So I took careful note in the earlier testimony around expression of interest. That is something that we're working on every day. What does initial expression of interest look like so the community can get to us and we can get to the community and build those criteria? We're not going to get everything. We're going to try to get as much as possible. So we're going to hear what is helpful to the community. And going back to, the location of this property in question, having an inventory. There is a federal land registry that's maintained by TVS. We have actually mapped up that whole federal inventory, but to be able to make sure Transport Canada is coming to us saying, we want to dispose of this property and we want to engage the community. How can you, PSPC, help us accelerate that and remove the dwell time?
So can you go to them? You're going to wait for them to come to you? Or I guess we're 4.5 years in. You say it used to take 9 years. I'm just wondering how it can be accelerated, given that it's a legacy, it's in process. Can PSPC intervene and say, hey, you're working on this, let's work together to get this done in the next 6 months so the community can get on this?
I'm afraid that's past our time. But another one to get back to us in writing, and I'm glad you've been writing notes about the Sandspit Inn. Mr. Genuis, please, for 5.
Well, thank you, Chair. I too want to share my congratulations to the new President of Mexico. I'm sure the Prime Minister of Canada looks forward to showing off his socks at the next Three Amigos Summit. I wanted to ask about companies operating on the GC Strategies model. We've talked a lot about ArriveCan specifically, but we have also been able to identify that there seem to be many companies operating on essentially the same model. That is, very small companies, 1, 2, 3 individuals operating out of a residential address, and their business is getting government contracts. That's it. That's what they do. They get government contracts and subcontract. Is it the view of the Government of Canada that we should not be contracting to companies that are using the GC Strategies model, that instead we should be going more directly to the companies who do the actual work? Or are you comfortable with this model continuing to be a big part of government procurement?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's fair to say that it's been consistently asked of me for several appearances. And this IT staff augmentation, it doesn't have to be IT, but the staff augmentation model is used by every country, jurisdictions in Canada, and private sector. So it's a well-known model. In terms of the efficiency it provides to the Government of Canada, going directly to consultants may not be the most efficient way. That being said, I think the member actually asked this question to me several months ago, and I did start to look at whether or not we would have the capacity and what capacity we would need if we wanted to go right to individual suppliers. So staff augmentation is a legitimate type of business that we do, and we haven't to date looked at the size, understanding that is one of the key elements you bring, the small SME. We haven't used that as a rate limiting factor for competing.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just ask though, I mean, why is this staff augmentation or GC Strategies model necessary? It would seem to me that it shouldn't be that difficult to have a kind of a detailed database or inventory in government about the specific skills that exist out there. And it seems that this model is actually used to get around a perceived excessive complexity of procurement. That this model is used because somebody has an existing standing offer or an existing relationship with government. So it's actually a vehicle for getting around red tape, not a necessary part of the system. Why couldn't the government have internally the people who have an expertise on finding the appropriate outside consultants maintain a detailed database of that information? Why would that not be possible?
Thank you very much for the question. I think that there are 3 key points here, which is government HR staffing, making sure we have the right skill sets to do what you propose. 2 is the actual procurement. What is it that we're trying to bring in? What services we're trying to bring in? And 3rd is that project management piece. When I listen to the member, I think a lot about project management. We're trying to deliver a service to Canadians. We're going to need to bring in some temporary staff augmentation, be it IT, be it project management, be it pay. And traditionally, staff augmentation firms have been the most efficient way to bring all that together.
All right. Okay, I've asked this question a few times because I'm still sort of perplexed in general by the government's approach to this. It would seem that project management capacity in particular is something that there should be a significant amount of skill within the government. I do want to try to get one or a couple more questions in though. So it seems that when I look at the documents we received on Indigenous procurement, that there are a couple companies that are getting an enormous amount of the contracts. Ottawa-based, in some cases, very, very small firms. How much do you think is too much? Like if 5% of the set aside is for, if there's a 5% set aside for Indigenous companies, and we're finding that a very small number of companies are getting a lot of those deals, are getting 3, 5, 7% of all of the contracts. Would that suggest a problem? And what percentage do you think would be too much of that overall share?
So short answer, please.
Thank you very much. Again, I heard the question asked and I started to think about it. We don't offer a cap on any company that competes for government business. So there's no similar approach in non-Indigenous firms. So I would not understand why it would be there for Indigenous firms. There's 50,000 Indigenous firms in Canada. whether or not they're registered on the Indigenous procurement business list is for them to decide. Like, we try to encourage them to get that number up so we have more of a competitive bassin pool.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sousa, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Deputy and team, for being here today. A lot of discussion around this table around procurement in regards to fraud and detection of fraud and safeguarding our positions to ensure that we take the proper measures going forward. Certainly in the 2024-2025 departmental plan, a lot of concern has been noted by the department, has been initiated by the department. And of course, a lot of discussions have been made by independent officers of the Crown, be it the Ombudsman and the Auditor General. So a couple of questions in regards to this. And I guess what I'm trying to get down to is the engagement by the committee versus the internal investigations that are undergoing. So do the individuals, do the targets of your investigation always know that they're being investigated? Do they know that they're under investigation?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm going to start and then I'll turn to Catherine. Understanding this has been an area of interest of this committee and other committees, we traditionally have a very aggressive stance towards fraud, whether it's in our own workforce, whether it is with suppliers. We have a lot of fraud detection and deterrence in place, and we talk about it a lot at PSPC because we are the department responsible for procurement, and the best disinfectant is sunlight. So we really spend a lot of time. Now, in terms of the individual investigations, I think the answer is it depends, but Catherine?
Thank you very much for the question. So when an internal investigation is started, at one point in time, the individual under investigation will be notified that it's under investigation, because in those internal processes, we're trying to build due process and fairness to those people, so they have the right to know what evidence are held against them and to reply to the allegation against them.
And so what happens then when, you tell me, when the RCMP gets involved, what is their caution to you? Like, what is it that concerns the investigator during an investigation?
Thank you very much for the question. So once we turn the investigation to the RCMP, our work is basically done. So it will be for the RCMP to decide what they are doing to do with our referral, and they do not necessarily inform us when and when they will take action on our cases.
Are there risks to the investigation when elected officials start to investigate the investigator or oversee the investigation when there's a proper due process in place?
Thank you so much for the question. I would say that, yes, there are big risks when this comes into the public domain, because those people have the right to fair and natural sense of justice. The RCMP or any other law enforcement agencies will want to take some investigation technique and approach. So to protect the integrity of those investigations, it's very important that those elements are being taken and kept private in order for them to allow them to do their job and to decide if element of criminality has been founded to lay charges against the people that may have defrauded the government of Canada.
And PSPC has obviously been engaged in a number of investigations of late. Do you cooperate with the Auditor General? Do you cooperate with the Ombudsman? Do you cooperate with the Ethics Commissioner? Like, are you engaged in these discussions to some extent?
We are certainly engaged in the discussion. Certainly we support the Procurement Ombudsman, Ombuds, the OAG. We respond, we're reactive, we share information, and we are proactive in many cases. As it relates to more of the RCMP, PSIC, je sais pas si tu veux rajouter quelque chose?
So we are cooperating, and moreover, we are sharing findings and best practices. We are making sure that people are aware of those cases without revealing any privacy item of those cases. We're making sure that we're working with OGDs also to leverage the capacity of preventing, detecting, and responding to those cases.
If you permit me to add, we also have a responsibility with the Competition Bureau and the RCMP. We run the contract fraud line, which is also another area where we're able to intake information and start to be able to do investigations, review, and refer matters.
Chair, my time is up. Please.
It is.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Witnesses, thanks for being with us again. Ms. Reza, just really quickly, I think what I'm hearing from a couple of people just regarding the amount of contracts and the piece of going to a small amount is just, if there's a belief from your side that perhaps the system is broken, if we have so many Indigenous suppliers, but so few are actually winning so many. And not a response now, but if I could just put that to you, I think maybe that's a concern. But maybe next time we see you, we can follow up a bit more.
Yes, and we can invite ISK to join us as well.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us again. We will dismiss you. Colleagues, I have 3 budgets I got to approve very quickly, please. First one is for, again, this is upper limit, $500 for... for Leah. Approved. Thank you. 1750 upper limit, and this is for SUPAs, including today. And the last one, 2004 Canada Post, which includes the last week's. Yeah, okay. We're all good. Just quickly, Wednesday will be Mr. Doan. Monday, June 10th, will be the Auditor General with the McKinsey study, which we commissioned, so to speak. The 12th will be red tape. And 17th, right now, tentatively, looks like the PBO for SUP-As. The 19th will be Minister Anand. There's no SUP-As for PSPC, so we will not see them. And then 21st, we'll play by ears if we are still sitting. Then, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.